In the 1990s, on the outskirts of a small town, there stood an abandoned psychiatric hospital, notorious for its dark history. In the past, patients were subjected to cruel treatment and experiments. The doctors performed horrific procedures, and many of the patients remained in these walls forever. Not because they were cured, but because they vanished without a trace. The hospital was closed, not because people wanted it to be, but because locals believed it was cursed. However, years later, the building reopened its doors. Sarah, a young nurse, joined the hospital staff, ignoring the old legends. On her first night shift, she met Alex, a janitor, who was also working his first day. Alex was confident that all the stories were just myths and didn't pay attention to the eerie rumors about the place. But that night, everything changed. Alex began his night rounds, checking the remote parts of the hospital. He walked into an old wing that had long been unused. According to the staff, there was once a ward where patients were subjected to cruel treatment. Locals said that even now, many years later, at night you could still hear screams coming from that ward. As Alex walked toward the ward, his sense of unease grew, though he didn't understand why. The old corridors were dark, and only the flickering lights of the lamps illuminated his way. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow thicker, and a musty, unpleasant smell lingered in the air. He reached a door with a rusty plaque that read, "Ward number 7. This was the place everyone talked about. He paused, wondering if he should enter. Suddenly he heard a faint sound, like a moan. At first Alex thought it was the wind, but the moan repeated, this time clearer. He decided to check what was going on. The door was heavy and creaked as he opened it. The inside of the ward was horrifying. The walls were cracked and stained with old red spots, and the floor was littered with the remains of medical instruments, rusty and terrifying. In the corner stood an old metal bed with straps for restraining patients. A chill ran down Alex's spine. It felt like this place still breathed pain and suffering. At that moment, he heard a distant scream. At first, the sound was muffled, but within seconds, the scream grew clearer, louder. It was a terrifying, piercing scream of someone undergoing cruel treatment. His blood froze. Alex rushed to the door, but it suddenly slammed shut with a deafening thud. He pulled at the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. The scream grew louder and louder until it seemed to come from beneath his feet. In a panic, Alex rushed to the window, but it wouldn't open either. It felt like everything in this room was against him. He sensed another presence in the air, something dark, something that had lived in these walls. Meanwhile, Sarah was finishing her rounds, checking on the patients, when she noticed a strange flickering light in the corridor. Her unease grew, but what scared her the most was that Alex had been gone for a long time. Sarah decided to go look for him and headed toward the abandoned wing. As she approached the old corridor, she immediately felt a cold chill. The air around her became heavy and damp. She thought she heard someone scream. At first, she assumed it was just her imagination, but then the sound repeated, this time so loud that it sliced through the silence like a knife. Sarah ran toward the sound and soon found herself in front of the door to ward number 7. She knocked, calling out for Alex, but there was no answer. She felt that something terrible was happening behind that door. When the door opened on its own, a terrifying scene unfolded before her. In the middle of the room, among the old instruments and walls covered in red stains, Alex lay on the floor. His face was twisted in terror, his eyes frozen, as if he had seen something horrific in the final moments of his life. In the air, the distant scream still echoed, a scream that could no longer belong to a living person. Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing. She rushed to Alex, but suddenly, she felt the floor begin to vibrate beneath her feet. Fear gripped her heart. The shadows on the walls seemed to come to life, starting to move toward her. She felt the room filling with cold air that grew heavier until it became difficult to breathe. In a panic, Sarah fled from ward number 7, but the sounds of the screams still chased her. She ran through the dark corridors, but the shadows seemed to be everywhere, creeping out of the walls, trying to touch her, squeezing her throat. When she finally made it outside, her heart was pounding so hard she could barely stand. She turned around one last time and saw a silhouette in the window of ward number 7. It was Alex, but something about his appearance was unnatural, as if he was no longer human. His eyes were empty, his face distorted with pain and horror. Sarah survived, but every night she was haunted by nightmares. In her dreams, she heard the screams from that ward, the screams of those who were subjected to cruel treatment many years ago. She knew that Alex hadn't disappeared without a trace. His soul had remained trapped in that cursed place. They say that ward number 7 is still locked, but those who pass by the hospital at night sometimes hear distant screams. These are the voices of those who were forever left in those walls, and who will not allow new victims to escape.